Vandy could elevate its recruiting in a huge way if they can tap into their NIL potential.
You are Locked On Vandy, your daily podcast on the Vanderbilt Commodores, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Vandy podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Corey Burton. Thanks for making Locked On Vandy your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Today's episode, we're going to look at two key factors that will be looked at as the catalyst for this 2024 Vandy team if there is some success there. But first, we're going to explore why Vandy can elevate their recruiting in a huge way if they can just tap into their NIL potential. Now, I say that, and I think they have to a certain extent, but like the factors we need to look at is why it would be beneficial for the university and for the collectives and for the players. And we need to look at how that would look in the immediate future and how that would look in the long-term future. So first is, why is it important? Why do they need to participate? Well, the way college football is going, as far as players go, I think if you're going to be able to get players that of a certain caliber that fit a certain mold, like a Carson Lawrence, for example, which I think NIL is going to come down. It's going to come down to a huge NIL battle there somewhere, wherever he ends up. He's committed to Vandy right now, but again, with NIL in the picture and some other offers on the table, it could get dicey there for down the stretch. But why do they need to do it? Why is it important, right? First of all, you get good quality players in that elevate the talent level on your team, which elevates your style of play. Okay. So that's the first benefit. The product on the field improves almost instantaneously if you can participate in not only high school recruiting, but also it allows you to be more active in the transfer portal in getting high caliber players. So you immediately improve the product on the field. You immediately become more competitive in your own league, in which you are, constantly degraded because, it's just Vandy. They don't care about football. Well, or they don't care about athletics in general. So what that does, okay. And I hope Vandy has realized this, the university. And I hope they realize that Stanford's been able to do it. Duke's been able to do it. Northwestern, to a certain extent, has been able to do it. Virginia has had some success. They ebb and flow. Obviously, North Carolina is a really good academic institution. They've been able to do it. But success in academics and success in athletics can coexist. All right. And they can become ambassadors and help each other out. Okay. It is possible for that to be the case. And I think it's important for that to be the case, because I think your academics can be elevated, can be promoted through the conduit of athletics. I think those two things can survive hand in hand. I think funding can also happen, which does happen at a lot of universities. I think when you see your successful athletic team, your brand, your name, your university is on the forefront of a lot of television exposure. Just think of the NCAA tournament, when all these smaller programs at some of these really good universities, they get publicity for being good at basketball, and they get talked about. And they're still a top-notch university. There's a lot of universities like that. George Mason was one of them when they went on the run to the Final Four. George Washington University, when they made a slight run. Gonzaga is a good college out west. We would have never heard about them without without the NCAA tournament, without them investing in athletics. And this was pre-NIL era too. And it still continues now. They've got even better. Now they're a household name. So the point of this is that these athletes representing the university can serve as ambassadors, right? You get a rising sport like Iowa got a lot of attention. I'm not saying Iowa's on the same caliber university that Vanderbilt's on, but in essence, you get that notoriety in their case because of Caitlin Clark. They were on a massive stage, and a lot of eyes were on the University of Iowa because of that. Now, unfortunately for them, they had a lot of eyes on them for not so good reasons either in the sport of football. But nonetheless, people heard that name. They can be, if you have good NIL, if you have good opportunities for student athletes to come in, get your education, and make some money for them and for the university by playing great on the field. I think it's a win-win for everybody. And for them to not tap into that, there's a lot of potential there, because I think Vanderbilt has a lot of NIL opportunities. Nashville has a lot of NIL opportunities as well. And for them not to tap into it, I think would kind of be irresponsible for the university. I think your prestige can only go so far. I think every university kind of needs that boost a little bit. And I think it helps when you have that notoriety. I mean, the Ivy League schools, they get it through March Madness because there's always a couple of Ivy League schools that do great or that do well in the NCAA tournament, and they get talked about, like Princeton, Harvard, a lot of times. But sometimes you get Yale and Brown and all that stuff. But, those schools get talked about, and, you get that little bit extra publicity. Now, they're Ivy League schools, so, sometimes they don't necessarily need all that. And so a lot of their other sports speak for themselves. Like lacrosse, you have Johns Hopkins University. Every once in a while on ESPN, you see them, but they have a really good lacrosse program. Harvard, Yale, all the Ivy League schools, they row crew. Like that's a big deal up in the Northeast. Some of the Northeastern sports that are big up there that have good notoriety, good reputations. Ivy League schools have that. They're not great. They're not football powerhouses, but they do have some athletic prowess. And that's good. And that means they can coexist. But this administration has to understand that they can better their university by putting themselves out there and signing the right people. They can still be a little picky in who they sign. Like they're not going to go sign the 2008 Florida squad, who I think broke the record for arrest and felonies and all that stuff with all the shenanigans that went down there. They don't have to go to that level to get a championship. But I think NIL allows you to be selective. It allows you to get good quality people in the building that happen to be good at football or good at basketball or baseball or whatever the sport is, women's basketball, whatever the case is. You get the right people in, you get the right nucleus in, and now you're starting to elevate. And so once you start kind of getting those players in, once you get the ball rolling, it's gonna go really, really well for you, especially playing in the SEC. You're going to get some opportunities of some guys that you wouldn't normally get, and that some schools wouldn't have the opportunity to get, like a Stanford, because of the league you play in and the exposure they get. Like if they have NFL aspirations or NBA aspirations, they can go to Vanderbilt, get a phenomenal education, and get an opportunity to play on the best stage in college athletics, which is the Southeastern Conference. So that's why, because there's so much opportunity there for the university and for the student athlete. It's a home run there. How they can do that is, well, there's a lot of, just look at the industries that are in Nashville. Just look at the opportunities. Nashville is one of the fastest growing cities in the Southeast, if not the United States. I feel like there's 1 billion people moving here every week, or every day. Condos are flying up around the city. The housing market is haywire. The roads are The roads can't sustain with the infrastructure of the roads can't sustain the rapid growth. So you have traffic problems that should not exist in any other city, that probably would not exist in the other city that's capable of it. Like if you had Nashville's population with Atlanta's infrastructure, you would still be able to handle it. It still wouldn't be a problem. Now Atlanta's grown exponentially over the last few decades, but like Nashville's on the same kind of path. Nashville was really, really small for a while, and Nashville is just a small southeastern city. It was Music City, home of country music, and a good place to visit, and people just started staying here. So you've got that potential. You've got the music industry. You got a really good healthcare industry hub here. You've got Amazon that's got some hubs here now. You've got you're starting to the Eastern Hollywood stuff is starting to kind of bleed up from Atlanta. Like it's starting to kind of sprout out from Atlanta and expand. There's some movie filmmaking opportunities there. There's a lot of endowment money at Vanderbilt. There's a lot of wealthy, not rich, wealthy Vanderbilt alumni and Vanderbilt supporters that would love to kind of pitch into the NIL effort to make their university, not the football team, the university, have a good name. So that's the potential that they have. They have the ability to do it. If they want to, they could. And once they start showing some things, some signs on the field, I think the two will I think you'll start to see the NIL come as the improvement comes. I think people are just waiting to see, okay, well, we were abysmal 2-10 last year, so we're got to see what's going to happen here with improvements and things. And there has been quite a few improvements. There's been an overhaul, actually. So change brings more change, and change is not always bad. So we'll talk about that. I think it's important to recognize there's been a lot of change, but what's been the catalyst? What's been like the key that's kind of unraveled this whole thing? Not really unraveled, but like had this whole thing unfold. We'll talk about it next. All right, let's talk about our friends over at Gametime. Did you know? I'm excited for the NBA Finals. How cool would it be to go to the game? I would especially, I don't know if it's called American Airlines Arena now, but at Dallas's arena, that would be a cool arena to go see. I think Mark Cuban's done a phenomenal job with them. But Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. So, did you know that you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc.? Well, you can. They also have flash deals, which save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of a game or event. There's usually something like a featured section or something, a section that's probably not quite as bought up or not quite as popular that they try to steer you towards. You can save even more when you choose the section and let Gametime choose the seats. That's called a zone deal. You have all-in prices that show you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. But you have to toggle this feature on because it doesn't come default. All right, but you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. I love this feature. You get the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. There's terms that apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN and you have to turn the TV down because of all the shouting? You have to turn the volume down if you're watching on your laptop. There's a lot of shouting. So you need to make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, NIL. We talked about it. Why is it important? Well, it's important because it's kind of now what drives talent acquisition. And it's going to be the thing that is looked at. Hey, if you participate in heavily in NIL, not only can you recruit your own roster, but you can acquire really good transfer portal pieces, and it helps you land some of the top players in the country if you have the right situation going, which, program prestige and things like that are going to start to not matter as much as NIL opportunities and exposure opportunities. Like, hey, I'm going to play on the biggest stage. I don't care if it's at Vanderbilt. And eventually teams like Vanderbilt, teams like that have good NIL markets will start to rise a little bit. I'm not saying Vandy's going to turn into Georgia by any stretch, but you'll see a rise. Okay. And there's been some changes here. So let's go back to the timeline here. November, right after Thanksgiving, after the Tennessee game, near brawl, you're probably at an all-time low. Okay. You're an all-time low. It was atrocious. Ending to the season in general, where you go on the road and you lose and get your face kicked in by the running Rebels at UNLV. You're barely competitive in any game that you play in throughout the course of the season, except for the two that you win, which those two were kind of like the Hawaii game was kind of a nail biter, but that was kind of a weird atmosphere because of the weather delays and stuff. But so fast forward, off season comes. There's rumors that Clark Lea is going to be let go. Ultimately, he is not. And that sparked a bunch of changes. Okay. That sparked I think that came with a caveat of, hey, you need to get rid of your coordinators and you need to find a different solution here. So the solution that Clark Lea found was, hey, first thing he did was after he fired defense coordinator, he just said, you know what? I'm to hell with it. I'm going to take over defense. Okay. That was the first move. That then led to the second move, which, hey, I need a good offensive coordinator. There's a team that does exactly, I think they're out of the box thinking, they're creative, their talent deficiency in their conference, even relative to their conference, is even kind of low. Like, they're not quite as talented as the other teams in their conference when you look at just the measurables and the stats and things. But they play extremely well on offense. They play extremely well on defense, and they do a lot of great things. They play well above their talent, and they get the most out of their players every week in and week out. And so he said, you know what? I want a little bit of that. And next thing you know, first move, the first domino that fell in that regard from Vandy, the Vanderbilt Commodores becoming the Vandy State Aggiedores, was hiring Tim Beck. Then once Tim Beck was hired, Jerry Kill was on the verge and kind of starting to have some health problems. He had to step down from being the head coach at New Mexico State. He joins the staff as like kind of a chief consultant to the head coach, which is basically just an off the field head coach. Basically an extension of Clark Lea that's going to now allow Clark Lea to focus a lot more of his attention on being the defensive coordinator, which is going to prove pivotal. So to me, And then there's a whole bunch of moves that came after that, getting Diego Pavia out of the portal, getting Nate Johnson out of the portal, getting, starting to hire some of the New Mexico State coaches, getting a brand new O-line coach and yada, yada, yada on down the list. All right. But let's say best case scenario hits and Vanderbilt goes to a bowl game. All right. You're going to look at two moves that started this whole chain of events, that started this whole thing. And that was move number one, Clark Lea taking over the defense, and move number two, Tim Beck being hired as the offensive coordinator, which then led to getting Jerry Kill. So your triad there of Jerry Kill, Tim Beck, and Clark Lea is going to prove as the reason for that. Now, if it's worst case scenario, obviously Clark Lea is going to get the blame for it because he's ultimately the head coach. He's going to get the credit and he's going to get the blame, obviously. But I think if you look at the catalyst to that, like if they have some success or whatever, it's going to be that move right there, followed by the hiring of Tim Beck, which is ultimately important. But the impact of those moves are incredible. It was out of the box thinking, and I really liked it. We'll talk more about it here in just a minute. All right, welcome back. Segment number 3. We are continuing on with that, but thank you for making Locked On Vandy your first listen each and every day. Thank you, and shout out to the everydayers who make all of this possible. Without you guys, I wouldn't have a show. Make sure you check out Locked On SEC. Make sure you make that your second listen, and also listen to the full lineup of SEC shows on our network if you want to be the most educated fan in the conference. So those two moves, the last two moves, the first two moves, Clark Lea taking over the defense, Jerry Kill and Tim Beck essentially running the offense, I think are going to be the catalyst of that, because offensively, you had zero identity. I'm talking like your identity was that you didn't have an identity. You didn't know what you wanted at quarterback. You had 3 great receivers that were getting open. You couldn't get the ball to them because you didn't know what the hell you were doing. You had offensive linemen that were constantly facing 9-man boxes because you're predictable, and the formations you came out in set those defenses up. The predictable play calling basically just said, "Hey, come knock the crap out of me every single play here. Let's make sure we're able to not move the ball." There was few offenses that were worse. Baylor, Iowa were worse offensively. But there wasn't many offenses that were worse than Vanderbilt. And defensively was a lot of the same. They were competitive because they had some talent. They were flying around a little bit, but then they just kind of got disinterested. They got confused. They didn't know, again, because they didn't know what they wanted to do. I think sometimes you get crossed up. There's blitzes that don't match coverages, and there's coverages, that don't match blitzes. And, there's some things that happen that, that shouldn't happen. There's miscues, penalties, all kind of stuff, man. Lack of causing turnovers. Special teams was okay. But like at a certain point, the season just unraveled and everything sucked. Okay. Let's just keep that in mind all right. So offensively, you have an identity now. Okay. You hire Tim Beck. You know what you're getting. You're getting a system. You're getting a way of doing things. You're getting Diego Pavia, who is an expert at this system. He's going to help establish what they want to do. Nate Johnson is a really good quarterback, really talented. He's just not ready yet. He's shown in spring practice he's not ready to take the reins full time. All right. He's still very, very raw. And this is, this offense predicates a little bit on being able to make reads. He's not there yet, which is fine, but he's just not there yet. So, and that's okay. He'll get there. Luckily, they have Diego Pavia to kind of help him get there. But, I think making this move showed that Clark Lea is willing to do whatever it takes to win. All right. He's willing to take on the fact that Jerry Kill is another head coach. He doesn't feel threatened by that. I really love that move because professionally, it helps him tremendously because Jerry Kill is a very, albeit the stats don't show it because he's never been anywhere long enough to prove it. And that's a lot of that's due to health concerns, unfortunately. But I think if he didn't have the health concerns, he would have exploded because he was what he did at Minnesota was incredible. And they weren't like slowly rising. They were starting a steep incline because one of my best friends, Matthew Perkins, is a Wisconsin fan. And I remember watching Wisconsin and he's like, Minnesota's supposed to suck. What's going on here? Jerry Kill is, he's a thorn in our side. And they were, on the football side of it, they were happy to see him go. Unfortunately, you don't want to see a guy go with like health concerns and seizures and stuff. But like, they were happy that he was no longer on the sidelines because he was starting to take over that division a little bit. Minnesota got the recognition, got the notoriety to be able to sign a guy like PJ Fleck because of Jerry Kill. All right, TCU, when they made their run to the national championship, who was a chief consultant to the head coach? I don't know if that was his official title, but he was in that kind of that role. It was Jerry Kill. New Mexico State had their best two-season stretch probably ever. I don't know the history of New Mexico State football, but I imagine that these last 2 seasons, it was the best stretch of New Mexico State football in program history. They won 10 games both years. Guess who was the head coach? Jerry Kill. So I think hiring a guy like that can help guide you along. And I think Jerry Kill understands that his health concerns will cause him to not actually be a head coach or not able to be a head coach. But this is the next best thing for him because he can still advise, he can still participate. He just doesn't have the pressure of the head coach's seat. He can help Clark Lea along, who commands a lot of respect. A lot of people talk very highly of Clark Lea. I just wish he was show a little bit more emotion there. But you have an identity on offense, which is phenomenal, which will pay huge dividends. I think that'll fix probably 3/4 of the problem from last year's offense. I think that fixes a lot of things. I don't know if that fixes everything. I don't know how that stacks up against the schedule. We'll be willing to see, but they did well in the transfer portal because of it. I think they have an identity now. They're starting to get guys in. They're starting to, guys are like, okay, I can buy into this, right? And that's good. Now, Clark Lea taking over the defense, same thing. You have a system. You have an identity now. You have a plan of action. You have an aggressive play caller that has attention to detail, had great defenses at Notre Dame. And I think he can do something similar here at Vandy. And those are the 2 moves that I think show growth in Clark Lea's tenure. Like he was relying too much on the coordinators to really just kind of run everything. And he was just kind of floating along at the top. And honestly, I think he was a fish out of water. He was somebody that just didn't really know how to act in that role. I think he had gotten a little too detached from it, choosing that path and not being involved either way, and really being kind of too hands off, it seemed. And he just seemed lost. Now you see him interact, it's a lot different. His demeanor's a lot different. The way he talks to the players is a lot different. The way he acts towards the press and the media is a lot different. I think he is more attached to the program than he ever has been since he's been here. He has got a lot more energy and a lot more spirit about him. There's just a lot of things happening since he decided to take the defense over that I think had he not, he probably would have still been the cyborg that you're wondering if he actually had human emotions, right? And I think this was probably the best thing he could have done. And if I ever get a chance to talk to him, I'll ask him, hey, did you ever feel like you were detached? It appeared to us like you were. Did you ever feel that? And was that the catalyst that I would love to ask him that. I would love to know that. Is him taking over the defense part of like him kind of snapping out of some sort of fog or some sort of funk that he was in? Because it seemed like that's what it was last year. So when you look at Vanderbilt's season, these two moves are going to be pivotal. Now, I expect to see six wins here. I think these two moves will help that because they will win some games that, even as abysmal as they were competitive for at least a minute. I think that lasts longer. I think you've got more of a team, and I think you've got a better nucleus of guys that don't know what it's like to really suck. And that's going to help too. So, but that's all we got for you today, man. It was an action-packed show. It flowed quite nicely, but I think you have two catalysts. You have NIL and all. It was a good, nice little action-packed show. But we'll see you back here tomorrow. We hope you have a wonderful Thursday, and we'll get you ready for the weekend tomorrow. And we'll see you back here. Behave yourselves, and as always, anchor down.